On my sailboat, I've got some damage on my teak and holly sole in my Sparkman & Stevens 35. And this summer was my time to get at it. Last summer I painted the outside of the boat, so this time it's all interior work, and I was dreading this teak and holly sole job, but just in time I got some much needed help. Let me show you. We just published this article on the Practical Sailor site, but I got to see it a little early before it went live, and wow, did it help me. I want to share it with you in this video because I think it's important if you're doing any work on your sole. Bert Vermeer wrote this one. A sailing buddy came to me looking for advice. He had inadvertently left a port light open, and haven't we all done that? And a combination of rain and snow had blown into the cabin near the nav station. The finish on the teak and holly cabin sole had been compromised. The surface had stained dark in areas and then bubbled white in other areas. As a fastidious boat owner, he was hoping to refinish the sole to factory condition. Failing that, the second choice would be replacing the teak and holly veneer with a similar product and hope that the same tint of teak and holly was available with a similar stripe width. On his 2006 Tartan 34, the cabin sole is plywood screwed down over a fiberglass substructure, similar to the way they still make boats now. The plywood has a very, very thin veneer of teak and holly laminated on top. Depending on how deep the damage was and how far that penetrated into the veneer of the plywood, the damage may or may not be salvageable. A local specialty lumber store happened to have marine grade teak and holly plywood available in 1/4 inch or 6 mil 4x8 sheets for $500 a sheet. A bit pricey considering that 1/4 inch sheet would still have to be laminated onto another marine grade sheet to make up the necessary 1/2 inch thickness that the tartan sole is. As can be seen in the photo here, the sole in the damaged area had an odd shape. It proved impossible to remove the entire panel without removing adjoining vertical cabinetry, something we didn't want to disturb if we could avoid it. Attempting to refinish the panel in place was not really a practical option. In reviewing the entire sole, it was noted that where floor panels met elsewhere in the cabin, there were solid pieces of transition teak. Why not cut the damaged panel out where an additional transition piece was likely to be? Splitting the panel would enable the removal without disturbing that vertical cabinetry. That was the accepted solution, and once cut, the two separated pieces were easily removed without disturbing that vertical trim. Examining the sawn edges, it was determined that the water intrusion was simply under the finish, not into the substructure. The water had not been sitting on the surface for very long. I had top varnished this cabin sole years ago to give it a fresh glow. I knew there was a layer of varnish over the original factory finish. With a heat gun and small putty knife, the top layer of varnish was very carefully removed. The putty knife heat gun combination and I go way back as a good many years, and I know how they behave. The corners of the putty knife have to be rounded off and the sharp edges sanded down, reducing the risk of gouging the surface. Great care was taken with the heat gun not to burn the factory finish or any of the bare teak underneath. This was not a place to rush. Once the top layer of varnish was removed, it was time to address the factory finish. Contact with Tartan Yachts revealed that the original finish was Valspar UltraGuard Premium Conversion Varnish, a 2-part epoxy product. Starting with 150 grit sandpaper on a padded sanding block to even out any hand pressure, sanding with the grain was commenced, one strip at a time just to keep a focus on a small area. Dust from the epoxy finish came off the sandpaper white, but dust from the teak came off a light brown. Visually, there was a marked difference when the sandpaper reached through to the factory epoxy into the thin layer of the teak and holly. Sanding very carefully, each strip was clear to finish until the teak looked even. Once the entire panel was sanded down, it was apparent that some of the darker stains, both from the water damage from the recent intrusion and that of damage near the engine compartment from years of slow water intrusion, still tinted the teak. Wiping the panel with a cloth dampened, not soaked, with solvent highlighted those dark areas. Wiping with a water-damp cloth will also show the same results, but will take longer to dry. If it darkened with a damp cloth, it would darken with any applied finish we were going to put on. I mixed up a small batch of oxalic acid, a product used to bleach wood, and applied it to the entire panel, allowing it to dry overnight. The next day, wearing a face mask, I vacuumed the panel thoroughly of dried crystals and then lightly sanded with 320, still with the mask on. When vacuuming again, it looked spectacular, a light teak color. But wiping it again with a damp solvent cloth revealed some continued dark spots. Again, those spots would reappear when we put a sealer on or a varnish. Another application of acid was applied and allowed to dry overnight. Patience is a virtue when working with this stuff. Following the second application and a light sanding, a wipe with a solvent cloth showed virtually no dark areas on the teak. We had some potential success. Tartan applied an epoxy base finish as a water-resistant sealing coat at the factory. That specific product is just not available locally, so we selected System 3 S1 Sealer, a two-part low-viscosity clear epoxy that I've used previously as a waterproofing agent on wood products. The very low viscosity ensured sufficient penetration into the teak surface for excellent adhesion. A thorough wipe down with acetone to remove any residual surface oil from the naturally oily teak, and the S1 sealer was applied with a small roller. A day of drying and the results looked spectacular. To match the remaining panels in the saloon, 3 coats of Interlux Gold Spar Satin Polyurethane Varnish were applied for a hard, glowing finish. The repaired panels appeared good as new. Although approached with a great deal of trepidation and considering the extent of the original damage, no great expectation of success, this product achieved better results than I believed possible. Sometimes I surprise myself, Bert says. This is all such good advice and information. I've got a whole bunch of spots in my boat I want to do. If you want to see the whole article and read all the parts that I left out, head over to the website. I'll leave a link in the description because it's definitely worth its weight in gold, or marine grade teak and holly as it were. While on our site, I also studied the article on corrosion inhibitors. I'm so tired of cleaning rust from electrical connections and metal hardware, and I really dove into the product comparison article here because it gave me 2 specific products that worked very well in testing. It also explains a lot about corrosion. Corrosion is an electrochemical process. It can occur at the molecular level, causing micropitting, or on a macro scale, eating away large chunks of metal. At any scale, the corrosion process requires an anode, a cathode, and an electrolyte. Remove any one of the 3 elements and you're inhibiting corrosion. I didn't know it was that simple. We ordered mild steel test panels from Q Panel Lab Products, an Ohio company that makes panels in highly controlled processes for the coatings industry laboratories. The advantage of using Q panels rather than some old hunks of scrap metal is that the Q panels are guaranteed to be metallurgically identical to each other and free of contamination that could bias our tests. I love this article and I learned so much from it. If you want to check it out and learn something today, I'll also leave a link to it in the description. If you like this how-to stuff, please give this video a thumbs up so we know you're out there, and leave a comment to let Bert know what other projects you want him to write about. Also, hit subscribe so I can see you again next time.